After veto, some lawmakers see a new emergency fixing the act Trump invoked. Washington U1 overarching law is almost always applicable in Washington, U the law of unintended consequences. Time and again, Congress takes steps to fix a problem, only to end up further aggravating the situation or creating a whole new issue. Such is the case on Friday, the president after Congress rejected that declaration. Now, with the immediate partisan fight over Mr. Trump's border emergency diminishing, those in favor of overhauling the 1976 law he invoked remain determined to pursue bipartisan changes in legislation they view as an abject surrender of congressional power. Ultimately, this is a problem created by Congress, and it has been allowed to persist by Congress, said Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, who this past week to make it more difficult for presidents to circumvent Congress through an emergency declaration. Congress is starting. The Emergencies Act was meant to restore Congress' constitutional role as a check on an increasingly powerful executive branch, not just because of President Richard Nixon, but because of a growing imbalance between the two supposedly equal branches dating to at least the era of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Mr. Lee's proposal was scuttled by Mr. Trump, who of trading a future legislative fix for support of his current declaration. Top Democrats. In the end, Mr. Lee and 11 other Republican senators joined Democrats in voting to block Mr. Trump's emergency declaration, sending the resolution of disapproval to the White House, where the president enthusiastically vetoed it on Friday, and slammed critics in both parties. Both the House and the Senate are well short of the votes required to override the veto. This means that the legality of Mr. Trump's declaration will now be fought in the courts, where the third branch of the government will no doubt consider the congressional intent represented by 2 votes against the president, who exploited the emergencies law. The thoroughly unsatisfying outcome for many on Capitol Hill could provide new impetus for Mr. Lee's plan, which would require Congress to approve any president's emergency declaration, or it will automatically terminate after 30 days. That would be a significant. If you want to declare a national emergency, we need to put a shot clock on it, Mr. Lee said. Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky and the majority leader, said this past week that he had asked the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee to look into the issue and that lawmakers said a hearing was likely. Though Democrats initially ridiculed Mr. Lee's proposal, a spokesman for Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she was also open to considering changes as long as they were not being pursued in the interest of political cover. Democrats will the House committees are reviewing the president's unlawful use of the National Emergencies Act, said the spokesman, Drew Hamill. It was never intended. Mr. Hamill was reflecting a widespread bipartisan sentiment that Mr. Trump and his advisors were employing the law in a way in which it was never intended to be used. But many the National Emergencies Act of 1976 initially allowed the president to declare an emergency in order to act unilaterally if certain conditions were met, but the action could be blocked if the House and Senate passed a resolution to terminate it, a process known as a legislative veto. But in 1983, the Supreme Court in the case of Immigration and Naturalization Service v. Chattahoochee found it was a hasty decision without much deliberation, Mr. Lee said. It was written for Mr. Lee said he believed his idea of establishing a time limit subject to congressional approval would be constitutional. He acknowledges that sometimes, he said, it takes a galvanizing event like the Wall Declaration to get lawmakers to band together. This has been created over time under Congresses and White Houses of every conceivable partisan configuration, Mr. Lee said. It needs to be a
Raindrop, drop top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park,